Well, I don't agree with all of his conclusions, and I think he really did miss a big piece in how wealth has been transferred in this country. But it's a good, sobering analysis of where we are. And for our listeners who may not have listened to Hour One, you can get it on podcast at Blog Talk Radio. You can just go to the archive section and under Fairness Radio and download the podcast. So just look for today's date, and then we interviewed Charles Murray in Coming Apart.
Well, now, Patrick, you read the book, so you might be able to have more on it, but I don't recall him saying anything about how wealth was transferred. But what he did say that I thought was interesting, and it was a question that I brought it up, and maybe you may disagree, and that is that the big money tends to be liberal in this country.
He did say that. He didn't talk about the wealth transfer. You're right, and that was one of my critiques, is that we have to see how we got into this situation if we're going to get our way out of it. But he did point that out, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that much of the wealth is concentrated in the large information centers of the country, Palo Alto, Silicon Valley, New York, Boston, etc., and these have a tendency to be blue states. Right,
and that the major media, the major wealth, combines, if you will, the big corporations, and when I say I'm talking about the top ones, they tend to be more liberal than conservative. Patrick, we also, you brought up the issue of Hollywood. I was there for one of the interviews with that author, and the other one I was not there. I don't recall him saying that Hollywood was more conservative than liberal. I think he talked about some conservative businessmen in Hollywood, but he didn't make, the culture of Hollywood, the movies, the actual art of Hollywood, and at least half of the business of Hollywood is not. He didn't describe it as conservative.
But what he described is that looking over the history of Hollywood since it was first founded in the 19-teens,
right,
is that Hollywood has produced more conservative lawmakers who have gone on to have enormous impact in our country than it has liberal. In fact, it's produced almost no liberal lawmakers. Now, that's different than the movies, but in terms of just power, Hollywood's power is conservative.
Well, I don't think that's a criterion on Hollywood's power. It just shows that individual actors coming out of Hollywood have tended to be conservative.
Well,
but
true.
If you look at Hollywood itself, it's not conservative. It's and I don't think he was claiming that it was.
He was claiming that the effect of people who work in Hollywood, the long-term effects of them are more conservative than liberal.
Yeah, but that's when they went on. After they left Hollywood. Ronald Reagan was no longer in Hollywood when he became governor of California. He started out there.
Yeah.
It's just it doesn't seem it doesn't seem all that relevant. You could say that he certainly started out there.
Well, that was his position. That if you look at what happens on the ground.
By the way, when Reagan was in Hollywood, he was not conservative. He became conservative later.
That was his position. If you look at what happens on the ground, Hollywood figures who actually make an impact have a tendency to be conservative and not liberal. That was his position.
I don't dispute that. I just don't. I don't think that's relevant. It doesn't say anything about Hollywood itself, and it doesn't say anything about what goes on there. Do you know what I mean? It's sure. After people leave Hollywood, mostly they might become conservative politicians.
Well, there are a few who are still there, like Clint Eastwood. But
Clint Eastwood's a notorious liberal.
Are you kidding?
Yes, I'm dead serious.
What university are you in? The head of the NRA? Come on.
I think you're mistaken. Clint Eastwood has a reputation for being a liberal.
Well, not in this town. He doesn't.
Maybe compared to. Warren Beatty, he isn't, but generally, by American mid-American standards, he's generally seen as liberal.
You've got to show me some information on that, because that's just contrary to everything I know.
And that's what I've always heard.
Well, you've been hearing wrong.
I think he's liberal.
You don't have too many liberals that head up the NRA.
Yes, you do.
Name one.
I don't know, Carlton Heston. Wasn't he? Or is he also conservative?
He's also conservative.
I don't think of those people as conservatives. He actually did become conservative. But I think that's an exception. I can't think of too many others.
Well.
But anyway, going back to Charles Murray.
Well, actually, I wanted to ask you about another person in the media. And this is an information question, not an adversarial question. Have you been following the the problem with Rush Limbaugh, if you want to put it that way.
Oh yes, I love the way I was listening to Ed Schultz talk about Rush Limbaugh. He was suspended by MSNBC for calling Laura Ingraham a whore and a slut.
Yeah, he apologized on air too.
He did, but after he had been suspended. But then he brings up Rush Limbaugh. He doesn't even mention this. Rush Limbaugh has apologized.
No, he mentioned it.
No, I heard it. I was listening to him when he brought it up. Maybe he mentioned it another time. I don't listen.
That's how I knew about it. Is he brought it up. But what do you think of what?
Well, I listened to him on his radio show, and he did not mention it. And I listened. That's when I first heard of it.
Well,
I think it was an obnoxious statement. He apologized, and that's should he be canned for it? He's apologized in writing. I mean, I don't think that he brought. I mean, as a side snide comment, admittedly, and he is a satirist. He mentioned that Bill Maher has referred to Sarah Palin with the C word, and he referred to her as an ignorant twat, and he mentioned other very vulgar terms. And he was wondering if the Democratic Party is going to give him back his $1 million donation over that. But, I mean, look, there's some problems with both conservative and liberal media people making very ugly comments about women. I don't think that it's certainly anything unique to Rush Limbaugh.
Well, it has been. He's been pretty hard on women for what, 20 years now?
Not really.
Yeah, he has. He's the one who came up with feminazis. He's constantly singing women.
No, I agree with the term feminazi. Yes, I do. I think he might have been better, and he was specifically referring to the National Organization of Women, which I would argue is very National Socialist in its orientation. So, I mean, that's political commentary. It has nothing to do with their gender. It has to do with that particular organization.
I totally disagree with you, but go on.
You disagree with me on what?
On your characterization of now.
Fine. That's a political statement, though. That's my point, and I think it's a legitimate one, and it's one that I would argue, and I agree with him on. Look, I mean, there's certainly. I mean, you take a look at Bill Maher, you take a look at a lot of these guys, and they're ugly, really, sexist comments. The whole industry could clean itself up.
Well, Bill Maher's sexist comments were confined to maybe one or two shows. Rush Limbaugh's are constant. But what do you think about the sponsors withdrawing?
They're not constant.
Yeah, they are. But
no, they're not.
Yeah, they do. I listen to him.
He is. And I
listen
to Rush.
Those comments.
No, I don't agree.
Well, we disagree.
We do disagree. I think that he was way out of line on that statement. And to conflate this and to try to somehow, label him is not right.
We're going to be out of line if we don't welcome our radio listeners in.
Okay. Welcome aboard, radio listeners. WWPR AM, Tampa Bay, Florida, and KRKQ-FM in Ashland, Oregon. Fairness Radio with Chuck and Patrick on Blog Talk Radio today. We'll be welcoming back our host station, Cyberstation USA Radio Network, tomorrow, hopefully, Patrick. Chuck Morse here, along with Dr. Patrick O'Heffernan. We're talking about the issues of the day. Patrick?
Our guest is with us, so why don't we welcome Judith?
Judith Reisman.
Hi.
Hi, Judith, the author of Sexual Sabotage, truly a Bible on the history of the Kinsey movement and the debauching of American culture, particularly the American male. Judith, you just got back from the Philippines. What's going on?
Well, actually, if you look at it, I just got back from a tour. It started in Rome, Italy. Went on to Cork and to Dublin, then to Vienna, then to London, and then took a break for a couple of weeks, went to the Philippines, to Manila and to Cebu, Philippines. Really all centering on, if you will, the fallout from the Kinsey movement. It's global. Good heavens. It's absolutely global.
You're an internationally recognized scholar in the topic, and when I say that, I include recognized by your opponents, whom I've heard mention you, and that being the people over at the University of Alabama, Bloomington, which is where the Kinsey Institute is. What is going on in a country that is relatively conservative, that being the Philippines, in terms of inroads made by the sexologists that are affiliated with the Kinsey Institute?
Yeah, well, huge. I mean, it's very concerning. I was asked to go there to deliver lectures to to not only groups of Catholic bishops, which I certainly did, but to the Philippine press and to Congress people. Mostly these are people who were very conservative. The Philippines has had a long history of well, it's a Catholic country, the last one in that area in Asia, and they are absolutely under massive attack by the billions of dollars that flow from UNESCO, from UNICEF, from the United States into their country to try to destroy, to physically violate, really, their whole history of sexual conduct, a history that has followed the Catholic model.
Now, you talk about UNESCO in particular, which has been referred to in the colloquial as the school board of the world.
Yeah, I never heard that. It's really true.
Well, that goes back to its founding by Julian Huxley back in 1947, who was the first general secretary of UNESCO. And what's their deal with the Philippines? Are they trying to institute a new curriculum?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only a new curriculum, but my goodness, this is so draconian. It's well beyond anything that we have going on here in the United States, with all the complaints about Obamacare and the payments for contraception and sterilization that would take place, people being forced to do that through the insurance and so forth. In the Philippines, which is much weaker, you see, than our country in terms of a resistant population, an affluent population that can resist. In the Philippines, they've taken this thing so far that the new laws, they call them the health reform, health care laws. These new laws would not only legalize every form of conduct that the Catholic Church repudiates and that goes against their religious belief system, but that is, they would legalize contraception. They would legalize out of wedlock or unmarried people.
Or normalize. Maybe legalize isn't the right word. What they do is it's kind of a values neutral education program in that it contradicts the Catholic scriptures. And as you say, Philippines is a very overwhelmingly Catholic country. What is the government?
Oh, indeed.
I mean, is the government involved in it? Are they sort of
playing
ball?
That's why I'm saying legalize, because the government would enforce these new laws that would make it illegal for anyone to even to object to the normalization and legalization of contraception, distribution, abortion, sterilization, and a whole broad spectrum of those kinds of behaviors. And in fact, they have a term that they're using there. It's called malicious disinformation. Malicious disinformation. And what they say is that anyone who objects to these laws, once they're put into place, first of all, can be jailed, and they can be jailed for malicious disinformation. That is, for speaking out, whether you're a doctor or a priest or a teacher or whoever, you can be jailed, actually put in jail for speaking out against any of these new laws that would be put into place. It's not only fascistic, it's communistic, it's tyrannical, it's it's horrific, and it's an elitist eugenics program, really.
Well, I mean, I think that the idea of having political crimes goes a lot further in a place like the Philippines, a much smaller country, much more vulnerable to big influence than in the United States. I mean, here you'll be fined, but I suppose ultimately if you don't pay the fine, if you're forced to purchase insurance or you're forced to do something against your will. And by the way, this is something that I think Patrick and I agree on, or at least he used to agree with me on, which is that, the aspect of the Obamacare that forced purchase of insurance is not good. But if you're forced...
I still do.
Do you? Okay, well, if you're forced to buy it and you refuse to buy it and you're given a fine and then you refuse to pay the fine, I wonder if you are possibly going to be subject to incarceration at some point.
Well, I think that's
maybe we're not
in my experience.
Yeah, we're not so far away
I'm looking at the Philippines.
Yeah,
I'm looking at what's going on in the Philippines, and I'm saying, good heavens. First of all, they would never dare to take that kind of position without the approval of the funders that are coming into the Philippines. And so, I'm positing this without any question as what appears to be on the blueprint for all of us who dare to object and speak out. I mean, right now, I would be accused of malicious disinformation, and that's jailable. Now, at my old age,
when you were in the Philippines, Judith, I assume you did speak out. What was the? How were you received?
Well, I was received extremely well. The population there is, of course, amongst the Catholic community. Which is most of the people there, but. Yeah, I was received quite well, and I had one congresswoman, and by the way, quite a few women in Congress there. I had one congresswoman who said to me, "Well, don't be concerned. Oh, that was because of the horrific sex ed that's going on in England. Good gracious!" But anyway, she said, "Don't be concerned about the sex education programs. They won't be sexually explicit. They won't be graphic here in the Philippines. They just will be a little line drawing, that's all." And then another congresswoman stood up and said, "Excuse me, but," she said, "already, 2 years ago we were having our little children being given, bananas or cucumbers, and they were supposed to put the condoms on the cucumbers and that sort of thing." The big issue here and throughout all of human sexuality education, which is all Keynesian-based, anything that's institutional, the big issue is they have failed. All the data is clear. The more quote-unquote sex ed we get, the more the obvious results, that is that we have more children engaged in sexual activity that results in sexually transmitted diseases. We have more children engaged in sexual activity that results in abortions. We have lots of big money being made by big pharma, which I see, of course, looming huge in this whole effort because the Leave It to Beaver type families do not fund big pharma. There's no STDs if our kids don't fool around before they get married. There's no money in abortion, in vaccinations for those little kiddies, for the HPV, Hep B, and everything else that's coming down the line. So big pharma makes a fortune from the Kinsey movement, the Kinsey sex ed movement. And all of the data internationally, by the way, all of the international data show that the more sex education you get, the more sex problems and sex diseases. And it boggles my mind. It really does.
And of course, it's difficult to oppose the sex education agenda or to claim that it's unconstitutional because it's not being promoted by people who have religious convictions. But let me welcome aboard Patrick. Patrick?
Hi.
Hi,
you.
Patrick. You were so quiet.
Well, you guys were talking.
You are so polite, Patrick.
Well, I'm a liberal.
Of course. I should have said. I knew that. It goes together.
Well,
gentlemanliness and liberality.
Can I expect you to be this way generally now, then?
I thought I always was.
Oh. Okay. Anyway.
You mentioned all the women in the parliament in the Philippines, and when I lived in Singapore, my housemates were Filipino women, and they pointed out that the high school system in the Philippines is extremely good, and and that women have very good opportunities to go to college, and more women go to college in the Philippines than men do, and they have a tendency to dominate the banking sector and the professions in the Philippines. And in fact, the three women who I shared a house with were all international bankers. Apparently, Singapore sucks them up as fast as they can. Yeah, so they've got And also it's a matrilineal system there, too, so women are held in much higher regard. As far as you're talking about the laws in the Philippines, does the Philippines have a First Amendment in their Constitution?
That's a good question. I don't know. I really don't know. First Amendment. I'm not sure that they do.
I don't think they do.
An official, I mean, neither does England, of course. So, and if they were under, but if they were under us, I would think that they would have. Kind of. Well, I don't know. I can't answer that.
Well,
good
when
question.
I worked in Singapore, I actually edited a magazine which we had reporters all over. I didn't go to Philippines. I had a reporter in the Philippines, and my understanding from her is that the First Amendment that protects free speech in the United States does not exist in the Philippines. Which is why, and neither does in Singapore either, which is why we had to be a little careful about some of the stories we printed. Which is why the government there can pass laws that say if you contravene these speech restrictions, we can. It's constitutional in the Philippines, so I can't really comment on what the Philippines is doing. That's their constitution, that's their laws, and that's the way it is. Obviously, it wouldn't fly here, and any suggestions that we're headed to that sort of a system here has not been looking at the news lately. It's not going to happen in this part of the world. As far as
I never say no. Never say no. We never know what will happen tomorrow, unfortunately. And you know that, Pat. You know that. History tells us that very clearly.
Absolutely. That's true. Who would have thought that in the middle of an economic problem in this country, the Republicans would be focusing on contraception? You never can tell what's going to happen. That's absolutely true. But getting back to the Philippines, I have a friend who's actually, maybe you saw some of these, who's running television and radio shows, their dramas, telenovelas in the Philippines, in which they lay out how families operate, and they're like daily dramas in the United States, except they talk about birth control and abuse of women and things of that nature, and they try to persuade through modeling in drama women to get married and have children, for people to use birth control, and for the abuse of women in Filipino families, which is fairly horrendous, to stop. And I don't know, did you happen to see any of those television shows?
Now, I was on quite a few television shows while I was there, but I didn't see the novellas that you were talking about, although I did hear something about that kind of an approach, for altering behavior patterns, and that's not unusual anyway. That's what TV is all about in terms of whatever we're doing, particularly, dramas and comedies and that sort of thing. They're all designed to reflect the view of the producers and whoever's funding them, and that therein lay the really serious problem, because that becomes, I remember when I was doing my PhD, we were told that it's very important what we're saying, what we're doing, and what we're writing for television, because we change people's behavior. And then when I graduated with my PhD, everybody out there told me, what we do here has nothing to do with changing anybody's behavior. This is just quote-unquote entertainment. And I thought, good heavens, what propaganda, how far we have fallen.
Well, of course, if you believe that, you believe that advertising doesn't work in this $8 billion industry, doesn't work.
Well,
my friend Bill,
yeah.
who's actually been on this show, produces these telenovelas and radio shows all over the world. I think he's in 12 different countries now. And they're aimed primarily at respecting women in the family, because what they find is that the less education a woman has, the more apt she is to get pregnant. And so it really emphasizes that daughters are educated, that the families stay together, and that women are treated well within families. And the other statistics that Bill looked at, he saw that the more women are abused, either by as wives or just as women, the more they have a tendency to get pregnant too. So at least I was just wondering if you happen to see what a Bill's telenovelas, but obviously you didn't. But this is another approach too.
Yeah, unfortunately, the data on physical abuse of women does not, as far as in terms of my own personal knowledge and experience, has spilt over. So we have lots and lots of very well-educated women who are being beaten like crazy. I deal with that all the time.
Yeah.
So that it may, and I think that you're right, or he was right. Initially, but things change, times change, people, and character changes depending upon the way that the nature is going. So the more pornography that you have in any given society, the more women are going to be abused and beaten and sexually assaulted, and so will children be. And that's another obvious reality that seems to go against the grain of the established financial forces out there. So that's been spilling over across the board. It used to be alcohol was associated very regularly with wife battery. It's no longer just alcohol. The minute you step into a situation where you've got pornography, alcohol takes a secondary step. And so we're looking at massive increases in not only physical but sexual abuse across the board of educated women and others as well.
Well, while you were there, since this is a very Catholic country, did you see discussions of the scandal that's going on in Germany now, and it was discovered that the Catholic Church owns one of the primary pornographer publishers in Germany, Wild Ben Press?
Indeed, that definitely has come up. Of course, and the Catholic, I'm not Catholic, so I'm not really privy to a lot of more detailed information from their perspective. I deal with what's happening to them, not who they are, in a sense. And they were quite upset, but they had some kind of reason that they thought that this Catholic bunch in Germany was really non-Catholic, and I haven't been able to follow that. But sure, we're going to have all kinds of abuses. As we develop a more abusive societies, we will have violent abuses within churches, within schools, within the governmental, circles, and surprise, surprise, even within the entertainment world, which no one, of course, in our field is ever going to want to have to admit, right?
Well, just a quick note: the German stories, which I have followed, indicate that the publisher was owned by a number of Catholic archdioceses, and that they each had a percentage in it. So it's wholly owned by the Catholic Church for 30 years. So, well, they'll have to deal with that. We'll talk about it on Religion Tuesday, I'm sure. I wanted to
put that on their list.
I wanted to ask you about your opinion, and I suppose I can probably guess it, but I'd like to hear it from you, on the sudden Republican interest in contraception.
Yeah, well, I think that, that appears to really be part of the idea of whether or not the average American has to pay for that, And from my perspective, no. I mean, we should not have to pay for that. What we should be doing is we should be trying to re-educate our children based upon what we know to be healthy sexuality, so that, in fact, these children are not interacting irresponsibly and prior to marriage and so forth. The whole idea, I'm at my age, right? I still remember the whole idea of no sex before you get married. Me and Hugh Hefner, he said the same thing, right?
Somehow
I
never thought I'd hear you say the term me and Hugh Hefner, but go ahead.
Yeah, me and Heffy, I mean, when he was in college, virgin, thinking he was going to preserve all that for marriage, and that's how most people were when I grew up. And so that's how we stayed healthy, and that's how the society maintained a good economic structure. We had the families, as much trouble as we might have. It was nothing like what we're dealing with today. So anything that would encourage further sexual promiscuity at all, and contraception that I have to pay for, certainly would do that. I can't answer for the Republican Party. I'm conservative. I'm not, and I'll vote probably Republican, but certainly not because I believe that they have adhered to what they ought to be adhering to in terms of what is healthy for this society.
Well, I was reading a couple of studies recently, some out of the Guttmacher Institute and from other institutes that pointed out that there's a deeper level to the findings that the states that use abstinence-only education are the states that have the most teenage pregnancies. And and this is actually Guttmacher pointed this out, is that one of the reasons is that birth control and abortion is less available in the states that teach abstinence only than it is in the states that don't. That no matter what you teach, it seems like teenagers are going to have sex, but in the states where abortion is available, they have fewer babies, and which is not a positive outcome. And I just wonder.
Oh, Pat. Yeah.
No, hold on.
I'm sorry.
My,
Go on.
my question.
Yeah, I'm waiting. I'm sorry.
I just wonder what your response is to the findings that teenagers in both sets of states have equal amounts of sex. Do you think that no matter what you do, teenagers are going to have sex?
No, that's so ludicrous. That's so stupid.
Okay.
I mean, historically it's so disproven. Whatever the culture actually expects of the young people is what the young people will do. When we have adults in our culture that lay down, and by the way, remember, Guttmacher is a Planned Parenthood satellite. It always has been. It always will be. So they have their own special interests.
They were making this finding, and it would be contrary to what the definition is.
Whatever it is, they have that problem in their background and in the way in which they carry out their research. I don't believe that. I don't believe that children I've seen contrary research that says that abstinence-based education really does restrict sexual conduct. I remember Elaine Bennett. I'll give you the best example. Elaine Bennett, Bill Bennett's wife, was running a program called Best Friends, right, within the inner city in Washington, D.C., and then it spread out across the country. And I can tell you right now that I attended the graduations of these little black girls. They were not having sex. They simply were not, because Bennett's program of Best Friends had set up a mentoring structure so that adult black women who are highly successful in society. I remember Powell's wife, General Powell's wife was one of the mentors. And these women came and spoke with these young girls and encouraged them to maintain their virginity, their chastity across the board. That meant all of it, prior to graduating from high school. And she had almost complete success with that. And these little girls used to graduate in beautiful gowns at this big event and have a little diamond and get a little diamond at the end of it. And so the girls weren't having sex. Guess what? It is what we lay out for our society that those children will do. If we sexualize them from word go, if we start with them, when they're little guys in school and start talking to them about sex, when those little brains of theirs couldn't possibly comprehend cognitively what's going on, but their little bodies can respond to what they're hearing, yeah? So, I don't hold truck with a lot of the research that comes out. No, kids will have sex if the society is pounding them with sexual images everywhere they turn. Kids, then they will have sexually transmitted diseases. Golly, then they will have to have abortions, or they will have to carry a baby through and have adoption. That is the cruelty of what we have been doing to our kids. And in my day, we were we could focus on being young. And we could focus on learning, and these kids are being cheated like crazy.
Well, obviously we have dueling facts, which will get us nowhere. So I want to respond to your point about you're paying for something you don't believe in. We all pay for things we don't believe in. I don't believe in the abstinence-only education, and yet several hundreds of millions of dollars of my money goes into it. And in a democracy, in a republic, you don't get to pick what you pay for and what you don't pay for. If we did that, half of America wouldn't be paying for the war in Afghanistan right now. In fact, more than half of America, about 62%. So if you're going to live in a democratic republic, which you are now living in, you don't get to make those choices. If you're a member of Congress, if your Congress and your president passes a law and it's a constitutional law, you have to go along with it. You can complain about it all you want. You can try to get it changed, but you can't just disobey it. That's what a democratic republic is. And I don't want to pay for a lot of things, too, but I get stuck with them, too.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. Unfortunately, this, of course, enters into First Amendment privileges, and this goes against the religious belief system.
No. Sorry.
Excuse me?
Article 1 says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Religion is running a hospital has nothing to do with practicing religion. Practicing religion is done in churches or in your own soul. It's not done by running a business.
We're not.
That's absolutely the case. If the Catholic Church doesn't want to go into business, it should get out of business. Those are the laws of business. The Catholic Church does not practice religion by running hospitals or running schools or by running institutions or anything else. That's business. Secondly, if the government did go along with what the Catholic Church wants, it would be respecting the establishment of the Catholic Church by enforcing its doctrines on the rest of America. So this is constitutional on both aspects.
No. In a word edgewise here, because I disagree with both of you.
Okay. All right. Let me make a station ID, and then we can have at it. You're listening to Fairness Radio with Chuck and Patrick, broadcast on the Blog Talk Radio Network, Cyberstation USA, and our radio affiliates. We're talking with Dr. Judith Reisman, and we'd love to hear from you. fairnessradio@gmail.com, 424-675-6866. Chuck, have your edgewise.
Unless the Constitution specifically gives, the government the ability to regulate, not create, but regulate, which is a conservative idea, something and pay for that, like war, which they do, then I don't think you are obligated to pay for something you don't want to pay for. And I'll give you the example of the Obama Affordable Health Care Act, which allows for conscientious objections from Muslims, for Christian Scientists, and for Scientologists. So, the government does recognize the concept of a conscientious objection, but the government arbitrarily gets to decide who gets to claim a conscientious objection in these cases. And I would argue, as a civil libertarian, as someone who believes in a more freedom-oriented system, and that individuals should be able to take a conscientious objection, as should companies, if they can make the case that they object to something, unless it is in the Constitution. Now, Patrick, you actually have changed your position on this. I know you keep wiggling out of it, but when Obamacare was passed, you said you opposed the aspect of it that would force people to buy insurance.
I agree. That's not in the Constitution.
Right, but then now you're defending it, and the point is that, and I think you're doing it because you think that maybe it's going to help your party. I don't know.
No, I'm defending it because it's currently the law of the land. It hasn't been declared unconstitutional. Until it is, I have to go along with it.
But all right, fine. It's the law of the land, but why? I mean, do you agree with that? Do you think that people should be forced to purchase insurance, or companies, or do you think that's a good law or a bad law? Because you seem to defend it in a very vigorous way, like you think this is good and appropriate.
As long as it's the law of the land, I will obey it, and I think everybody else has to obey it. I don't agree with it. I think it's unconstitutional, but until it's declared unconstitutional, I have to obey it, and so does the rest of the world, including the Catholic Church.
Oh, all right. Then, because the way you've discussed it is as if you think that this is something that, the Catholic Church should do this because not just because it's the law, but because they just should do it.
No.
And I think that if Muslims can take a conscientious objection, I think that Catholics should be able to as well, and I think they could make the same case. And by the way, that includes Muslim institutions. It's not just Muslim individuals.
Well, we've delegated that authority to the administration, and as of now, the administration hasn't made that decision.
Oh, that's right. And I would argue that that's more than unfair. It's discriminatory, and if you're going to give an exemption,
indeed.
Yeah, if you're going to give an exemption to one religious group, you have to give the exemption to all religious groups if they make the case that the aspect runs against their religion. And I think the Catholic Church makes that aspect and has a tradition of it.
I agree with you, and I don't think they should have given exemptions from to anybody.
Oh, well, that's...
but if they've done it, then...
Well, you don't think they should have given exemptions, but yet you think the entire law should be repealed.
Well, it's the law. I didn't say repealed. I said it should be. It goes before the Supreme Court fairly soon. If it's determined to be unconstitutional, then we don't have to obey it.
So you just want to look to the Supreme Court, but you don't think that that you think it's okay for the government to force people to buy insurance as long as the Supreme Court says so. But as a matter of public policy, you think it's good.
If it turns out to be constitutional, then yes.
Oh, okay. Well, that's certainly that's slightly different than the way you have been putting it quite frequently.
Yeah, I understand. I'm drawing the lines here. I think it's a bad law because it was written by the insurance companies to enrich themselves with our tax dollars. I think it should be thrown out, and we should have universal health care.
Which would, of course, mean that everybody would have to pay for it.
Right. That's why we're a nation.
So then the idea of forcing people to pay for this is not something you object to, because you seem to be taking many positions on it, and now you've even added another one.
All right, I'll make it very clear. I think that we should have universal health care, which means that all of us taxpayers put into a single pot and that provides health care for everybody. I think that's part of what being a nation is. I think this particular law is a bad law because actually what it's really a subsidy to the insurance companies. It's forcing us to purchase insurance from a private corporation. Nowhere in the Constitution does it ever say that the government can force us to buy anything from a private company. However, if having us pay taxes to provide services, that's in the Constitution, and I agree with that.
So then it's not so then it's simply more of a matter of style here.
No.
In other words,
no.
You have no problem with your objection to forcing people to pay for insurance is because they're paying for private insurance, but you don't object to it if they're paying for public insurance.
Correct, because the Constitution does not authorize the government to make us buy something.
Well, the Constitution doesn't say anything about people having to buy insurance. It says you have to pay for war. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any clause in there that says that the American citizen has to buy insurance.
Well, universal health care would not be buying insurance. It would be universal health care like Social Security. We pay taxes and we get services. That is constitutional.
No,
we can have a big debate as to what kind of health care is health care.
No, it actually is forcing to buy insurance. It's public insurance because if a person then gets sick, the government allegedly is insured. And, of course, if the government controls it, the government decides what they're going to cover and what they're not going to cover and how much they're going to cover it.
Well, I think you're stretching the term insurance, and under your definition, we should immediately get rid of all the veterans insurance, too.
No, that's
and Medicaid.
Well, Medicaid is something we pay for.
Well, exactly, right. My point.
And it's voluntary. I mean, the states can opt out of that, and some do. I mean, you're talking about an enforced system. And also, as far as veterans, that's also, we have a voluntary army, and we offer a benefit to individuals who choose a specific function. It's not a national forcing of everybody.
Well, without the veterans insurance covers people who were drafted. Judith, were you trying to get in a word edgewise here?
Well, dub. Yeah, sure. I have some real problems with the notion that it's legitimate to close down a Catholic hospital or a Jewish hospital or any kind of hospital that serves people or abortion, adoption clinics because they don't adhere to the law that is requiring that they provide the abortion services or something like that. So when you start talking sex, you're moving into something that I debate with you is, quote, health care. That I'm looking at that in a very different way than somebody who comes down with pneumonia and should be able to somehow be covered for their pneumonia. It's not their fault. Well, maybe it was, but when we start talking about reproductive health care and providing birth control and all this sort of thing, we're stepping into an area that is much more complex than anybody wishes to address. Because what about the responsibility of the society to control its stimuli, the material that goes out to everybody that causes people to behave in sexual ways that are dysfunctional for them and for the rest of us, and then we pay for that. No, we've got to set up. We do or we don't.
A quick correction: there is no law nor movement to close any Catholic or Jewish hospital at all. They may not be able to receive federal funds, but nobody's closing them down.
What if they don't pay the fine?
That's right.
Oh, you're talking later under. Okay, that's a different thing. If they don't pay the fine, then you don't close them down. You put a lien against their property.
And what if they don't accept that, Patrick?
Well, they have no choice on accepting it. It goes into the record, and it's just there. And if they ever try to sell the property, it's paid off.
You don't know if that's how it's going to be handled, but I'm saying, what if there is?
You.
I didn't say I did. You're the one that brought it up. What if there is a movement of civil disobedience by institutions and individuals who say, we're not going to pay for this insurance and we're not going to pay for the fines?
Well, civil disobedience is exactly that. And when we had civil disobedience during the civil rights, people went to jail, and that's why it's courageous to conduct civil disobedience. If you expect to do civil disobedience and not get punished, then you're not courageous.
Right. Then, in other words, they probably if you take a look at the system, and yes, it's going to be very courageous. If you take a look at the system, then eventually they're going to have to incarcerate people if there's going to be a movement of civil disobedience. If people start standing up and saying, we are not going to pay for this and we're not going to pay for the fines, we're opting out of the system for whatever reason, whether it be religious or whether it be a matter of conscience. There's nothing in the Constitution that says I have to do it. Look at, they were conscientious objectors to the war.
And they went to jail.
Yeah, and that is in the Constitution. This is not. So if you're going to have, you're going to have a situation that's kind of like what Judith is describing in the Philippines, really.
Well, I think you guys are both taking it to a huge extreme. And we'll wait and see on that.
Oh, my goodness, Pat. That's what history tells us all the time. Everybody says, you're taking it to a huge extreme. Hitler will never do that. Stalin will never do that. This will never happen. Genghis Khan will never come down on us. Look, that's the way the cookie crumbles. It rolls. It goes. It's got its own momentum. Hold your breath. You might not be arrested and put in jail, but some other folks are going to be.
Well, we should wait and see on that. I have a feeling that the Supreme Court is going to sort of moot the whole case and throw that aspect of the health protection law out. But we do have this process called the courts, which we are utilizing quite strenuously, and we'll see how that goes. That's going to be used long before anybody gets arrested.
Well, hopefully, Patrick. I hope there's enough people on the Supreme Court who understand the Constitution and who are patriotic, who will do just as you say.
Well, I think all the members of the Supreme Court understand the Constitution and are patriotic. That's why they're there. But
they all of them view it a little bit differently. You'd have to admit that. Okay, so understanding it and viewing it very differently means that everybody kind of has a different take on it. Unfortunately, it's not always a take that we all agree with.
Well,
and besides, look at the history of the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
We've had Supreme Courts that have ruled that blacks should be sold. We had a Constitution. And so, come on, the court reflects the public will as well. They reflect the propaganda in a given situation at a given time.
The court doesn't reflect the public will. Not always. The Citizens United, the public is universally opposed to that, and yet we got the decision. But, of course, we have different opinions of the Supreme Court. That's why they're there. And you only bring that up when you don't like what they decide.
Me?
Well, there's been a lot of progressive opinions. I could point to Buck versus Bell in 1925 when the Supreme Court decided that based on eugenics and evolutionary theory, the very progressive Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes decided that it was legal for states to forcibly sterilize women who were deemed to be unfit mothers. And
there was also the Supreme Court decision that allowed California to herd Japanese into concentration camps. They're not always right, but they're what we have. If you're not going to go by the Supreme Court, you're in the wrong country. That's what we have.
I thought that was just Governor Warren and Roosevelt. I didn't know there was a Supreme Court.
Yeah, there's a Supreme Court decision on that.
Oh, absolutely. It was a Supreme Court decision. And Buck versus Bell, that was a raped woman who was raped by her employer and ends up being the poster woman for sterilizing everybody, that one didn't like. Come on. We have to, quote, listen to the Supreme Court, but we have to have our own brains and logic as well, too. And we have to be able to speak out against and not be condemned for malicious disinformation and put in jail.
Well, nobody is saying you weren't.
I hope I live.
I'm saying that when the Supreme Court makes the decision, that's the law of the land until it's overturned. That's the way this country works.
It's interesting that Buck versus Bell was championed by the It was championed by the progressives in their day, and the opposition to it was the Catholic Church and religious people.
Exactly.
But religious
yes,
people
remember
right
that.
Too. And of course, Citizens United was championed by the corporations and has been one of the worst decisions, according to the American people, in history.
Yeah, very liberal.
So we can always point to things that we don't agree with.
You know, the issue with Buck versus Bell, I mean, because that was championed by progressives and the eugenics.
I have to check your facts on that one, Chuck. I'm not going to believe that.
I've written a book on the topic.
Definitely.
It's very documented.
It was eugenics.
Eugenics
was
movement
very modern.
progressive and very left before World War II. It's very documented.
Well, that was before World War II. Let's talk about the present. Well, we're way off topic.
No, it's actually very relevant.
I don't think
the point I'm trying to. Well, I think history is because it tells us about the present. But as far as that issue, my question to you is that because Buck versus Bell and the cause of eugenics was promoted by the anti-religious left at the time, the progressives. Does that mean that it's okay because it's not a theocracy versus the Catholic Church and religious people who are against it, their position being religiously motivated? Wouldn't their position mean imposing a theocracy?
I don't know enough about to answer the question, and I'm not being interviewed here. Judith is. So, Judith, why don't we go back to talking with you instead of arguing about long-gone Supreme Court cases? So that's my response to you saying that you don't want to pay for it. There's a lot of things I don't want to pay for too, but in a democracy, if the law says it and it's a constitutional law, we do it.
Well, and we object to it strenuously.
And that's what the conservatives tell us all the time, the authoritarian conservatives. And we can complain about it all we want, which is what we're doing right now.
We're not just complaining, hopefully. We're talking about arguments that are legitimate one way or another. Yeah, it isn't just whining. We're not whining here. We're trying to talk about what are the moral imperatives in our society. You know, that's what we're addressing really. When we talk about contraception, we're addressing is there a reason to restrict the mass distribution of contraception, say, to unmarried people? Well, historically, this country, and not so long ago, historically, this country did prohibit the distribution of contraception, certainly only to married people, because it was trying to encourage people to keep their guys to keep their pants buttoned and ladies to, keep their skirts tied around their legs. And so
between the knees.
Or whatever. And all of these things seem trivial. The dress code, is it trivial? Are these things trivial? I think in the long run we find that whatever the country does below the belt is the way the country will go. I mean, historically we know that. And we know that human beings are highly vulnerable to all sorts of input that will alter their character. And at this point in time, when we look at the Hardee's advertisement, okay. Oh, well, you have to get a look at the the latest Hardee's advertisement, Some Like It Hot, which is a pornographic ad, and I will say specifically, I'd love to deal with that ad on a legal basis.
Is this Hardee's
in terms of First Amendment? Yeah, Hardee's, that kind
sandwiches?
of stuff. No, this one is a hot jalapeno thing or whatever, well, a lot of kids didn't miss it. That's the point. And I will tell you that they certainly will need contraception, if these kinds of things are spewed out all over the place, unless we've decided that these images and these kinds of stimuli and the advertising budget, which is billions, and the work that goes into creating every advertisement actually does have no effect. And therefore, these youngsters and oldsters and the sex addicts who were trying to fight that, who accidentally turn that handle and see a Hardee's ad flap out at them with this young lady doing her thing, doing things that, quote-unquote, publicly, well, you think that doesn't have an impact on the way people behave, and then the argument about contraception and the argument about what is really covered by First Amendment and free speech, all this enters into this. What people do below the belt will determine the nature of their given society.
To a certain degree, you're probably right there. On the other hand, we're a society which is made up of free people, and if people want to engage in sex before marriage. That's part of America, is we let people make their own decisions. That's who we are. We're a free people. And Griswold found that the states cannot deny contraceptive to people whether they are married or not married. That's another part of being free people. So, and our previous guest pointed this out, that what we're talking about here is a culture change, not a legislative change. And I agree with him there. I'm not advocating sex before marriage, but I am advocating for freedom. And I think that we should be allowed to make our own choices, that the government should not get in there and say, you can have birth control and you can't.
No,
that's against what America is.
No, it is, Patrick. They're just saying that we don't have to pay for it. Birth control is not even a controversy at all. 99% of people think it is. It was Fenton Communications in Providence, Rhode Island, that came up with this idea to snooker the Republicans, and unfortunately Santorum was dumb enough to fall for it. Good thing Mitt Romney didn't. But putting that aside, the issue is not whether or not you can't have sex before marriage. The issue, because of course
that's what Judith just talked about.
No, you can in a free society. The issue is whether or not we, as a private culture, what Charles Murray talked about in the beginning of social capital, whether we as private institutions should advocate restraint in that area, not banning it. Nobody can do that. No one's ever suggested it. Of course you have a freedom to do whatever you want, but a moral society encourages people not to. They encourage a restraint.
Well, I have no problem.
Look, I would debate that we're talking about freedom anyway. Where is this business about freedom? People become what their environment dictates over time. In 1948, you had a different character. This character viewed freedom differently. We are talking about shaping a society. The Germans weren't always a bunch of Nazis. They became Nazis because of the shaping of that society. The propaganda in a given society will shape the character of that society, and we all know that. We are living it. We see it. So this silly business about freedom, as far as I'm concerned, that's just a bunch of propaganda. There is no such thing as quote-unquote freedom. Your minds will be shaped by the things that you're seeing daily, by the schools that you attend, by the children that you're working with and next to, by the parents that you do or don't have.
We are out of time, and apparently by the ads you see, too. I'm going to have to go look at that hard.
Indeed, by the ads you see.
The book is Sexual Sabotage. Judith Reisman, thanks so much for joining us.
Judith, thanks for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on the air.
It's always a pleasure to be on here with you guys.
All right, great. And we shall return, God willing, tomorrow, 1 p.m. You're listening to Fairness Radio.